Hello and welcome to the Absolute Beginner Guitar Lesson Series. My name is Oliver and today's lesson is lesson number 29. And today we're going to move beyond triads or 3-note chords, and we're going to begin to study 4-note chords. I have here a C major scale, the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And I have the notes of the scale numbered. And as we learned in lesson number 3, a series of 3-note chords can be built upon each note of the scale. So for C, we would have, as you can see here, a series of chords can be generated using the notes of the scale. These chords are 3-note chords and are known by the technical term as triads. And when we studied the C major scale in lesson number 3, and we first generated these scale tone chords, we determined the names of the chords. The C chord is major. So we established our triads in that lesson, and we've been working with these 3-note chords, and they're very popular chords that are used in pretty much every style of music, in Western music anyway. Today we want to sort of move beyond these chords, and the first thing that I want to make you aware of is that we can actually build a series of 4-note chords, and these chords will be built on these scale tone triads that you see here. And the method that we use to do this is similar to the method we used to derive the notes of the scale tone chords. So for example, when we look at our C major chord, we have C, E, and G, and just quickly we derived those notes by starting with the root note C. We skipped over the D and took E. We skipped over the F and took G. Well, we can add another note to this chord simply by continuing from here, and we're going to skip over this A note and we're going to add the B note. And we can do this for every single chord. And so now we've taken the triads and we've added the 4th note to each triad. Now we have a series of 4-note chords. So now what we have to do is we have to name these chords. And I'm going to provide you with some additional information. This C chord is known as the C major 7th chord. And I'm just going to write MAJ7 to indicate major 7th. And this D chord is known as D minor 7th. So a little M-I-N and then the number 7. So now we have a series of 4-note chords which we've built using the notes of our scale. And it's important to understand that these chords are actually based on the 3-note chords. And each one of these chords is a major, minor, or diminished triad that has a 4th note added to it. And when we add the 4th note, it changes the name of the chords. So now we have a series of chords, and I think we should probably take a closer look at these chords. So the first chord I want to look at is the C major 7th chord. So I'm just going to write out the notes of the chord. We have C, E, G, and B. And I'd like to perform a little analysis. For anyone who watched the lesson on chords and triads, we know that chords are derived from major scales. So in order for us to look at this chord, we need to analyze it with respect to the C major scale, which we have right here. And if we do that, we can see that C is the root note of the scale. and we represent that with the number 1. So when we analyze our C major 7th chord, what we have is we have the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th notes of the major scale. And it's important to understand that every one of our notes comes directly from the scale. And I actually like to think that the major 7th chord is called that because the notes come directly from the major scale. And as we can see here, if we take a look at our chords that we have, we can see that the C chord is a C major 7th chord, and the F chord is an F major 7th chord. So I can sort of infer from this that when we're dealing with 4-note chords that are derived from the major scale, the chord associated with the 1st note of the scale and the 4th note of the scale are major 7th chords. And the next chord I want to look at is the D minor 7 chord. And we have the notes D, F, A, and C. So if we're going to do an analysis of this chord, we must analyze it with respect to the root note parent major scale. D is the root note of our chord. Therefore, we must analyze our chord with respect to the D major scale. So now we can do an analysis on this minor 7th chord that we have here. And if we do an analysis, we can see that our root note, D, is the 1st note of the D major scale. And our next note is F. We don't have F in the D major scale. We do, however, have F sharp as the 3rd note of the scale, but we need F. So what we need to do is we need to alter this note. And we need to turn this F sharp into an F. And in order to do that, we must flat the note. And if we flat F sharp, we get the note F. Now we must reference this note to our scale. Well, F sharp is the 3rd note of the scale, and we flatted that note to make it F. And this F is now known as the flatted 3rd. So now what we have here is the formula for a minor 7th chord. And what we did was we took the root, the flatted 3rd, the 5th, and the flatted 7th notes of the root note parent major scale, which in this case was the D major scale. Now, it's important for us to understand that what we have here is we essentially have a D minor triad. And what we've done is we've added the flatted 7th note of the scale. So we can see our D minor 7th chord as a minor triad with the flatted 7th added to it. Next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at our dominant 7th chord, and that is a G chord. So what I'm going to do here is I want to analyze that with respect to the G major scale. So when we take a look at our G dominant 7th chord, or as it's commonly referred to as a G 7th chord, we have the notes G, B, D, and F. So now let's perform our analysis. And this establishes a formula for the dominant 7th chord, which is also known commonly as the 7th chord. And what we have again is we have the major triad with the flatted 7th note added to it. So we have one more type of chord that we need to look at and analyze. And that was our B half diminished chord. So when I go ahead and write these notes out, I'm going to get B, D, F, and A. So we need to analyze this with respect to our B major scale. So let's do an analysis on this chord. Let's start with the B, which is the root note. We know that is represented by the number 1. So this sort of establishes our formula for a half diminished chord. And this chord also has another name, and that is the minor 7 flat 5 chord. Okay, but let's just take a quick look at this chord. And what we started with was the root note, the flatted third, and the flatted fifth. These 3 notes represent the diminished triad. So what we have here is we have a B diminished triad. And what we've done is we've added the flatted 7th note to the diminished triad. Now, before I go any further, I kind of want to do just a real quick comparison that's going to sort of explain why this chord is known as the minor 7 flat 5 chord. So if you just indulge me for a minute. So let's just contrast these 2 chords. First, let's start with the minor 7th chord. In the minor 7th chord, we have the root, the flatted third, the 5th, and the flatted 7th. Well, if we contrast that to our, I'm just going to write here, minor 7 flat 5, what we can see is that we have the root, we have the flatted third, and we have the flatted 7th. The only difference between these chords is this chord contains the flatted 5th. So this chord here, B, D, F, A, could be seen as the B minor 7 chord with the flatted 5th. Because if we take the F sharp, which is the 5th, and we flat it, we get F. So this is why this chord is referred to as the minor 7 flat 5 chord, or the half diminished chord. So I just wanted to sort of take a little aside there to just show you that this minor 7 flat 5 can be seen as an alteration of the minor 7 chord. We took the minor 7 chord and we flatted the 5th, and we end up with the minor 7 flat 5 chord. So these are the 4 types of chords that we have now that we've added the 4th note to each one of these triads. So now I just want to go back to where we started. Let's go back to the C major scale. I want to point something out. And I want to just draw your attention to this G here. When we had our triads that we derived from the C major scale, our triad for the G was a major triad. However, when we make it into a 4-note chord, it becomes known as a dominant 7th chord. And I want to point out something that's sort of distinct about this G note, or specifically about its position in the major scale. The G is the 5th note of the scale, and the 5th note of the major scale is what's known as the dominant. And I don't know, coincidentally or not coincidentally, I'm not an expert on music theory, I would think that not coincidentally, this chord here that we derived, this 4-note chord based on this G, is the dominant 7th chord. Now what I'd like to do is I'd sort of like to do a comparison between the different types of chords that we have here. When we're dealing with the major 7th chord, all the notes of the chord come directly from the scale. There's no need to alter any of these notes. When we look at the dominant 7, we determine that it had the 1st, the 3rd, the fifth, and the flatted seventh notes of the major scale. So as you can see, the only difference between these two chords is in the seventh. They both start with the major triad or contain the major triad, with the significant difference being that for this dominant 7 chord, we have the flatted 7. So I like to see the dominant 7 chord as a major triad with the flatted 7. So now moving on, we have the minor 7 chord. And we established the formula for the minor 7th chord was the root, the flatted 3rd, the 5th, and the flatted 7. If we look closely, we have a minor triad. And we essentially have a minor triad with the flatted 7 note added to it. And that's how I like to remember what the minor 7th chord is. It's a minor triad that has the flatted 7 added to it. And finally, when we look at the minor 7 flat 5 chord, or the half diminished, we have the root, the flatted 3rd, the flatted 5th, and the flatted 7. So this chord here starts out with a diminished triad and adds the flatted 7. However, as I said before, the minor 7 flat 5 chord can be seen as an alteration of the minor 7th chord, where we take the minor 7th chord and we flat the 5th to get the minor 7 flat 5. So now we can sort of see these chords side by side. And one of the observation that I can make is, with the exception of the major 7th chord, all these other chords contain the flatted 7. What the differences between these chords are in the 3rd and the 5th, where the dominant 7, we have the 3rd and the 5th that are directly from the major triad. When we get to the minor 7 chord, the 3rd, we have the flatted 3rd and the 5th, and these are taken directly from the minor triad. And the minor 7 flat 5 sort of takes this and alters it even further. And now we have the flatted 5th along with the flatted 3rd. And it's important for us to sort of understand the differences between these chords. And if we understand the differences, we won't become confused with them. We have the major 7th chord where the notes are taken directly from the scale. The dominant 7th chord can be seen as an alteration of that major 7th chord where we flatted the 7. Then we have the minor 7th chord where we started with the minor triad and added the flatted 7. And finally the minor 7 flat 5, which is essentially the minor 7th chord that's been altered even further. The good news about the minor 7 flat 5 is the name tells you exactly what the chord is. It's the minor 7th chord with the flatted 5th. The major 7th and the dominant 7th chords are built upon the major triad. So these chords are major in nature. And the minor 7 is built upon the minor triad, and the the minor 7 flat 5 chord is built on a diminished triad. But I like to see the diminished triad as an alteration of the minor triad. So these chords are minor in nature. And it's important to understand these because these 4-note chords are commonly referred to as substitution chords. And the reason that they're referred to as substitution chords is that they can be used as direct substitutions for the triads. So this is the basic fundamental information of the lesson. And if there's a couple things I want you to get out of this lesson, the first thing I want you to get is that a 4-note chord can be built on each note of the major scale. when we end up with these 4-note chords, the chord that is associated with the first note of the scale and the fourth note of the scale will be major 7th chords. The chords that are built and associated with the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th notes of the scale will be minor 7th chords. And the chord that is built upon the 5th note of the scale will be sort of unique in that it is the dominant chord. G is the dominant note. And if we build a chord upon it, a 4-note chord, we will get a dominant 7th or 7th chord, as it's commonly referred to. So that's it for now. Put in your time, put in your work, and I hope to see you at the next lesson. Peace.